Welcome, everybody. We are rolling. We are fresh off of whatever joke I was telling before I did that countdown, and I'm glad you guys are here. I'm Dayal here with Kishore, Chandra, and Acyuta Gopi. We're tuning in live from London. Kishore and I are here in London. Acyuta is still back on the other side of the pond in New York City. And I'm glad to be here with you guys. How you doing? Good morning. Welcome to our live studio audience. Welcome to all those listening in. Somebody asked me the other day, how many people listen to your podcast? And I was like, I have no idea. I've never checked. So I don't know if there's one of you out there, or two of you, or 10, or 20. I don't know what that looks like. I'm glad you're here. Drive safe.
Oh, it's like 14 of us right here. So.
There is, yeah, there's like 14 of us here. So that much I know.
How are we doing?
I'm doing great.
Kishore?
I'm ready to hear about Ram and how he has to do with my life. I want to know I want to know the lessons about
Yes.
Ram.
Yeah, yesterday I got fire gods, lots of wives, and
Special special
special
rice.
special rice milk. Special rice milk from the celestial beings that produced babies. We got into it.
We got into it.
You got to be careful with those like celestial gifts.
Celestial gifts. Beware celestial beings bearing gifts. Isn't that from the Iliad or something? Didn't Homer write that?
Yeah.
Or is it something else? Um, so where do we leave off, and where are we today?
Yeah. So we left off with the birth of Ram, and today we're gonna move to another section around maybe about 5 years later or so.
Fast forward, fast forward.
Yeah. Fast forward, give or take, 5 years. Everybody's happy. Everybody's doing the things. Everybody's feeling okay. And then at around 5, they actually send all of the boys from Lakshman, Bharat, Shatrughna. Dasarath wanted one son, he gets 4. Uh, and they send all of the boys to Gurukula, which means the house of the family spiritual teacher, which in this
Mm.
case is a very, very powerful celestial named Vashishta Muni, who has been around for millions of years and continues to be around for millions of years afterward. If you wind up reading within Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll wind up seeing a list of names of like rishis, and they all show up in the first canto when Bhishma is leaving the planet and everybody's getting all of this celestial knowledge. But there's so many sages, and the sages, because of their austerities and sacrifices, have these incredibly long lives. So they go to the ashram of their guru, kind of where this idea of Gurukula comes from even today. And they learn a whole host of things, but most importantly, it's kind of a time for them to be kind of like monks. And so the interesting thing about Vedic lifestyle back then was not like monk life was only for specific people. It's kind of like that was a phase of life that almost everybody would go through. So the warriors would go through it, the brahmanas or teachers or priests would go through it. Sometimes even the Vaishya or the merchant class of people sometimes would go through it, and they would be monks for some time, and they would kind of just learn the art of discipline, which I thought was something extremely interesting for all of us, like having this section of life where you learn the art of discipline. Um, and
College is like the time where people just go, in America, it's this time where people go wild. It's like
yeah, right?
freedom.
Yeah, yeah. And the queens were not actually so happy about it because they're 5, and kids at 5 are like sweet and tender, and they just kind of want to like hold them and cuddle them and love their children. And basically they're going to send them to an ashram and not see them again until they're about 16. About 10, 11 years they spend time at their guru's ashram, and that's a lot. And I just kind of think about all of the most foundational parts of when you're growing up. And I used to think about this a lot when I was little, because like from 5 till whenever, at those most like foundational moments, I was in school but didn't have friends. Like you wind up facing all of these like hurdles and all of these jumps and all of these things. And um, just thinking about doing that without your parents can be daunting. Doing that without having this foundation or this home base can feel daunting. So all of the boys, they go to their guru's home, and there are loads of other children that are actually there. And they teach them different things. They teach them yoga. So they start off in the morning with yoga and paying obeisance to the sun and Surya Namaskars. They teach them prayers to Goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning. They teach them so many things. They teach them politics and diplomacy. They teach them all the things that are needed to become good princes and how they can become good administrators. And they also teach all the other children how to perform fire sacrifices because, that was the thing to learn. As we covered yesterday, it's like the know-how. And they teach them all the ways to become parts of good society. And during this time, they're also sleeping on the floor. They're like waking up early, going to bed early. They're learning how to clean an ashram. They're learning how to care for cows. They're learning all kinds of things. And during this time, Ram and Lakshman become inseparable, and Bharat and Shatrughna become inseparable, which is why I was saying that usually we wind up forgetting that Lakshman and Shatrughna are the twins because they become so close to the elder brothers that you would think Ram and Lakshman would be twins. Um, Lakshman has a separate twin. And it is said that Ram and Bharat look almost identical. Look almost identical. Um, Interestingly enough, normally if you look at pictures, Ram is portrayed as blue, kind of like Vishnu, but Ram is actually green, which I've always wondered what that looked like. Somehow or other, in my mind, I've like gotten an idea of what maybe a bluish tint would look like. Please don't ask me how I got that idea, but like I feel like I've worked it out in my mind, but I have not quite yet figured out what a dusky, gorgeous green luster would look like on skin. I'm really, all my artist friends, I'm always like challenging them. Give me something. Let me know what it might look like. Um, so Ram and Bharat almost look exactly alike. And while they're there, Vashishta Muni has a wife, and her name is Arundhati. And so she comes and she says, "Oh no, there's storms everywhere. My goodness. Sorry, Sydney.
That's not
Definitely."
what Arundhati said. That's what Sydney
No, that's
said
not
in
what
our
she said.
chat.
That's like in the chat. So Arundhati says, she goes to her husband and she says, "You're teaching them all of this philosophy and diplomacy and political intrigue and all of these things. She says, but I have a problem." She said, "You're not teaching these boys any softness." And he says, "Well, they have to become warriors and administrators. There's no place for softness in the world that they're entering." She says, "But there has to be. Otherwise, how are they supposed to get married and live with other people? How are they supposed to take care of their wives and family if you teach them nothing about tenderness?" She said, this is it's unconscionable. What will they become if they're not balanced?" So there's an idea of balancing this masculine energy with a feminine energy. And she's like, they have to become balanced. Because, well, what do you suggest? She says, "Let me teach them art and music." And so Arundhati gets together and she teaches them art and music. And so they learn to play various instruments. They learn poetry, they learn songs, they learn how to sing, they learn all of the arts and dramatic endeavors in order to balance these two energies so that they don't just come out being like warmongers and people with an imbalanced mindset where all they know how to do is to manipulate and to create different political atmospheres. So she was saying that there's such an incredible need, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on today, this need of balancing these masculine and feminine energies, and how important the arts are,
Mm.
especially within a spiritual atmosphere. How important it's not just that we should create policies and we should have all kinds of, there is a need for diplomatic intrigue and for having advocacy and activism, but there's also a need for being more tender. There is a place for tenderness in our spirituality. So that's this kind of what I wanted to
Mm.
focus on today.
Kishore,
I love that. So,
you're quite a tender man. I'd love to hear from you.
am I a tender man? Well, I was just gonna, the first thing that came to my mind when you were speaking, Acyuta, about this topic, and there's so many wonderful topics there too, just discipline and going to the house of the guru and learning, having a time in your life to become disciplined, like that's amazing. But this, what came to my mind is, it's kind of like the hot word, not so much right now, but it's still definitely there, is like toxic masculinity,
Mm.
right? We've heard this, and it's it's such an interesting thing, toxic masculinity. I have some friends that are men that really don't like this term, toxic masculinity, and feel very like attacked by it and all. Whatever.
That's
And
because
then
they're
there's people
toxic.
that's just they're toxic.
Point in the case. Point proven.
They're the ones being toxically masculine. But I agree wholeheartedly that there needs to be a balance of masculine and feminine energies. And I think that I'm not going to go into the whole toxic masculinity realm because that's a whole can of worms. But I will say that I think it's really sad when men, or people who deem themselves as masculine, and we see this in society, are so afraid of feminine energies, or they're so afraid of their any lack that others might see in them, lack of masculine energy or whatever. And I think that that's really how we can define toxic masculinity in a sense. Of course, it will have its characteristics of like overly masculine and warmongers, and like you were saying, Acyuta, but really this fear of being criticized or being questioned, like my masculinity being in question. And it really, I mean, I'm having one of those connect the dots, like, red lines everywhere moment, because it really it really comes back also to how women are treated in society as well nowadays. Because the fear of being criticized or judged or less than from a masculine standpoint also stems from, what if people view me as feminine, and that there's like all this whole misogynistic aspect to it, all this fear around what it means to be an effeminate man, or a man that is more tender, or a man that's more in touch with their feelings. So it's so beautiful that you brought up this point, Achita, because I feel like it's very timely for today's age. I think it's a topic that a lot of people are speaking about, and I'm seeing Jeffrey saying fear of lack seems to be the crux of the issue, because Krishna carries what we lack. Yeah, I love that actually. Fear of lack. Beautiful. Dayal, I think you're also tender, Dayal. What do you have to
Am
say
I
about this?
really?
Yeah, I think you can be.
I see the potential. There's potential in you. I've seen glimpses. I've seen glimpses. I'd say hopefully I don't let anybody down here. Um, it's a very interesting kind of conversation for me to wade into, because I grew up in a very matriarchal family, and my parents divorced when I was very young, and my dad moved out, and I stayed with my mom. I'd see my dad every other weekend or something, but the main presence in my life was my mother and my sister, and the three of us lived together. So I was living in a house with older women that raised me. And also, my mom is one of seven kids, and so she has three brothers and three sisters. And in general, the women are the breadwinners in our family. They're the decision makers. The men are a little bit more passive. Um, and so I always grew up with this comfort of being taken care of by women and having women in charge and making decisions and looking up to them. And to be quite honest with you, the majority of my friends today are women. You know, Christian, my wife always makes fun of me in posts. It's like, oh, you're going out to see all your girlfriends? And I'm like, yeah, is that okay? Like, not like girlfriends, but like Rukmini is one of my best friends, and you know, and so, um, like this idea of like female leadership and like women being in charge and like et cetera is like, I know it's a big deal and it's not the way society works, but I'm always like, yeah, like what's wrong with that? Like this idea of like women's rights and women's being a part of things and bringing women's voices into the conversation. And I've also never this idea of like, yeah, what it means to be, and sometimes I question and wonder like maybe there's some, maybe I should look more into it. Maybe there's something that I like am missing, but like there's all these ideas of like men's retreats and like discovering what it means to be a man. Like I read this book about like what it means to really be a man. I'm like, none of that is of any interest to me. like I don't have any desire to go on a men's retreat, you know, and you know, and like be with a bunch of men. Like, what does it mean to be a man? And I'm just like, I'm just being myself. I don't know what that means, you know. And so this idea, I think for me, it's more a matter of just like what it means to be human. And I think that this idea of, yeah, there's masculine and feminine energies, um, but you know, and it's something that my wife and I, we never really get into, our, you know, like I'm not like, you know, the head of the household, and it's like we don't have any kids, we have a dog, she takes care of the dog more than me, but like we share like equal roles in the house. And I just, yeah, for me, I've always kind of felt like an observer of that conversation of like, okay, there's people talking about like what it means to be like masculinity, etc. And I'm just like, go for it, guys. Like that sounds great. But I think for me, it's always a matter of like what it means to be human, and more than what it means to be a man. And what, you know, there's a lot of, so yeah, you can say there's a lot of, it can be effeminate in many ways. Um, but I just, for me, I find what works for me and what it means for me to be a human. And if that's masculine, great, then I'm doing that. And if it's not, then I'm gonna go with what works. But I see Acyuta nodding her head and leaning to unmute herself.
Yeah, yeah, I am. I think I've always been, whenever friends have asked my advice on matters like that, and even in terms of relationships, etc., I've always been the person who said, you know what, you have the ability to make your own rules
Mm,
this lifetime in this relationship, because you're the one that's going to have to live with it. You have the ability to make those rules. And so what is masculine or what is feminine doesn't have to be projected by what's happening out there and then put on you. You have the ability to create your standards. And you know, just looking at that gorgeous picture of Lord Shiva behind you, Doyle, I really feel like Lord Shiva is such a prime example of this constant balance of, like, he's one of the most masculine deities, and well known for like being this emblem and example of Shakta, or masculine energy. And he's constantly depending on Shakti, the feminine energy. And in a certain case, he actually loses his wife once. And when he loses his wife, he's completely distraught, like universally
mm,
distraught. And it's said that because she winds up like burning herself in a fit of rage, like it becomes like an act of defiance and social activism. But she winds up burning herself with her own like mystic potency. And he's so upset that he goes around the universe for a long time carrying the remains of her body, and he's wailing, and he refuses to be consoled. And even after, they're thinking, okay, we have to do something, we have to like separate him from her body. And even after they do that, he decides, he's like, you know what, I'm not going to be involved anymore with all the things that you guys got going on. I refuse. And then he goes internally in his grief, without his feminine counterpart. He decides that he's going to withdraw himself from everything. And so at a certain point now, they're like, well, the universe is not going to function properly, like we need him to come back. And then they pray to Adi Shakti, the primal energy of the goddess, to reappear and then reconnect with Lord Shiva, because like we need this, we can't work without this balance. And so I just think that it's so important that we don't get sidetracked by this fear. And that fear is real. It can come up, even if you look in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is like, how is this degrading impotence come upon you? Like there's this idea that if my masculinity comes into question, then there's this impotence. Right? And it's like a common insult you'll see in Bhagavatam and in Vedic spirituality. Like you're like, oh, you get compared to an impotent person. It's like, oh my God, it's like the worst thing that could happen. And even when they look at Krishna and they're like, if you do so and so, you're gonna go down in history as like your masculinity is gonna be caught into question. If you run away from this battle, what's gonna happen? And Krishna's like, I don't care. Watch me run. He's like, forevermore, I'll be known as the runaway. Sure, cool, no problem. But and this is Krishna. This is Krishna. Krishna now, he's like this deity who's like, I don't care. I don't care what you think about me. Here's what his people think about him. But everybody else, he's like, I'll make my own rules. And that's kind of what I really love about Krishna, this ability to like, I run by my own rules.
What you shared at the end there, this idea of what people think of us, I think is so spot on, because so much of it comes from who we're trying to impress or who we want to accept us. And what I find is that so often people I just observe in the world, we're trying to impress people that we don't even know who they are or what that standard is. Like who's standing in front of you saying, this is what it means to be a man, or this is what it means to be a mother. This is what it means. You know what I mean? There's these kind of standards that are produced, and we don't even take the time to step back and be like, whose standards am I trying to come up to? And who set these standards in the first place? And if I'm trying to come up to somebody's standards who's going to judge me profusely and reject who I am if I don't meet them, maybe they're not the kind of person I want to be impressing, And so I think a huge part of spiritual maturity and where we start to integrate these aspects of, our material identities is that, like, kind of discerning who really matters in our life. And I think that's been a big part of it for me, is like really discerning like who really matters and who doesn't. And so often the pressures we feel about, like, it's not so much like what I think I should be doing, it's what people are thinking I should be doing. And I've given this power over to people through their perception of myself. Are you gonna let them do that to you, man? Like, oh, you're gonna let them do that? You let them talk to your girl that way? I was like, what are you talking about? It's just like, and so I think that this idea of really allowing ourselves to get triggered by the way people perceive us and setting that aside and determining for ourselves who really matters in my life. And that's a game changer. It's a huge game changer. I think that's a big part of spiritual life itself, is that when I'm determining this whole segment of people, like, okay, I respect people, I appreciate people, I'm always looking to learn and grow, but like I'm not going to let their perception or thought of me or what I should be throw me all the way off course. Like, because these are the people that I've determined really matter. These are the people who I respect and appreciate and I'm dialing into. And I think when we lose touch of that, we're just kind of tossing ourselves around in a whirlpool of whatever anybody thinks about anything. Jeff said, how do you determine who matters while retaining equal vision? I think you do that on a level of respect, on a level of like, there's broad spiritual equal vision, and at the same time recognizing the differences between ourselves. All life is spiritual, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to go and just kind of, not everyone's my best friend. Doesn't mean that I just marry the next person I see. Well, because they're all equal, It's like we have a psychophysical nature that we invite into our life, and that's part of being personal. It's part of being human. Having that discernment about who brings me closer to that spiritual realization, who takes me away from it.
My mom used to quote Srila Prabhupada all the time, saying that we understand that the tiger has a super soul and a paramatma, but we don't go and embrace the tiger. We still have to use our sense. And I think that that's also, it goes for people, it goes for animals, it goes for even traditions. That's a big thing for me. It's like looking at these traditions and traditions being passed down, because that's what's happening with Ram, right? He's going to his guru's home and all these traditions are being passed down now. And actually looking at which ones are feasible and which ones work, and then which ones are meant to be cyclical. And it's like, okay, that cycle has passed for that tradition. Now it's time to let another tradition enter in.
Mm,
This,
yes.
I know we're about to end, but this point that you
He's,
just made,
he
Acyuta,
sure just came alive. He's like,
this point,
yes.
this point that you just made is definitely something I wanted to expand on, because I think the idea is knowing, right? Like the example of the tiger, it's like knowing the dangers of the material world it behooves us. I love this word. It behooves us because the reality is that there are people out there. There is a society who has set certain standards. There have been many times in history where people, according to their race, according to their sexual orientation, according to their country of origin, are persecuted and ridiculed and etc. And therefore, it is a very real thing that people are viewing us a certain way and viewing how we behave or how we look or how we act. And therefore there's real danger there. There's real danger on like on a material level. So you find throughout history people acting to fit into this kind of norm, right? Whether you're an immigrant, whether you're a person of color, whether you're like LGBT or like whatever. And there's this whole idea of like passing, right? Like passing in society. And I think it's really interesting, and I'm not going to open the can of worms too much. I'll be succinct. I think it's really interesting because something I've noticed in my own personal journey is that when we understand, or when I've come to understand, like I have these identities that are a part of me. Like I understand they're a part of me, but I'm not that that's not who I am completely as a whole. And therefore, like the more I can understand that, it's like I can visit that feminine energy. I can visit that masculine energy. I can utilize it when it behooves me, like if I'm in a situation with like a bunch of Hispanic people, I need to turn on the Hispanic identity and like be Latino and speak Spanish and like do that whole thing, and etc. And I think it's really interesting because then from a societal and a physical standpoint, it's like I have the things in my toolbox that are going to help me, move through the society in a safe way, right? Like I have a relationship with the tiger where like I'm not going to embrace you, I'm not going to go into situations that are going to be dangerous. And I think last thing I'll say here is I think that with modern day society, it gets really mixed up because the identity politics becomes so intense where it's like I am that, right? Like no, this is who I am, and I'm that all the time in whatever space I go into, no matter what. And if you can't respect the fact that that's what, and it turns into this whole thing, and it's like that's a part of who you are. And can I learn to tap into the feminine emotion when it's needed, or when I need it? Can I learn to visit the masculine when it's needed or when I'm needed? Because I think right now we're in a place, kind of, at least in society, where there's not, I mean, there's still danger in like many parts of the world, just on how you act, how you look, and etc. But at least like in our, I don't know, Western New York City context, like it's not that bad, it's not that intense. So there is more of a freedom in terms of like, let me understand these identities that make me up, as opposed to like I am this identity. Yes.
Boom.
Boom.
Boom. Take that, everybody. um, I have to let a little bit of my toxic masculinity side come out. Otherwise, I've just been suppressing it this whole episode with all of you guys. As soon as this gets over, I got to go punch something. Kimberly, what takeaways you got for us today?
Carving out time in our lives to develop discipline, the idea of balancing the masculine and the feminine energies, how there's always space in our lives for gentleness and tenderness, and then learning to discern whose opinions and what traditions really matter and fit into my life.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Acyuta and Kishore, what's something you're walking away with?
You go first, Acyuta.
Everybody's like, wait, when do I unmute? Do I? I like the idea that you said, Kishore, of I can visit that like opposing energy, and then I can take what I need from there, but then I can also go back to the other side. Like, it doesn't have to be you're always on this side or always on that side. And for me, that's huge, because I find myself in masculine circles a lot, and I find myself having to tap in to that masculine energy a lot, and then I'm always kind of wondering, I'm like, what does that do for me? Like, what does that? And so I've been in a place where I've been getting more comfortable with actually telling myself on certain daily bases that, wait a second, I think I need to tap into being more gentle today, or I feel like I just want to tap into being more like restful, or I want to tap into being more tender, or I want to tap into like, and because I lead kirtan and all kinds of things, and my nephews all the time like, you lead kirtan like a dude, and I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, it's like it's something that it happens, but it's like those times when I'm like, well, I think I'd like to be more like, and it happens, and it's in days. It's not all the time. It's like there's certain days where there's more of a balance or a switch up, and I think that having that acknowledgement of like, I can tap into that more today, or I think I need more of that today, is more healthy than thinking, oh, I am just one thing or the other.
Yeah, for
You
me,
take it, sure.
I'm walking away with just this just being more self-aware, just being more self-aware, I think is what I'm walking away with, because I think that I really like what Dana said, that she says, I find I have to stop labeling myself, and then I can have an easier time giving myself permission to be whatever I am in the moment. And I really like that, because it's like just being self-aware and I was thinking of another word for aware, self-aware of like what I'm experiencing in this moment, and then once I can feel what I'm actually feeling, I love this word that Acyuta used, then I can acknowledge it, right? Because if I don't even know what I'm feeling, or I don't even know what's going on with me, I'm not acknowledging it. And then I'm actually living in a space of delusion of what I think I'm, supposed to do, or supposed to be like, or the role I'm supposed to fit. And that takes us away from like what we're actually feeling or experiencing in the moment. So yeah, that's what I'm walking away with, trying to be more self-aware.
I'm walking away with I gotta find a men's retreat. Gotta find one. Get around some dudes.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
Oh, goodness. I love you. I love my friends. Jeffrey said, I like Kishore's point about visiting expression of a material identity, and Dell's point about discerning those that enrich our consciousness. That's what Jeff's in a log splitting contest.
I don't even know what that is.
You haven't seen those on ESPN, like the lumberjack Olympics?
I don't watch ESPN.
They got like big chainsaws. So like who can like carve a tree faster?
Now I see why you said I was more tender. I don't know what you're talking about.
Like on ESPN 3.
Oh, Krishna.
Anyways, I am I am ESPN 8 the Ocho. Okay, this chat's getting out of hand. I am walking away with the idea of discerning whose opinions really matter in my life. That's a big one that I'm walking away with. And I'm going to leave it at that before this chat gets out of hand. Love you guys so much. Love you guys all in the chat. Love you guys tuning in. We really appreciate you being with us here every day. We will be tuning in tomorrow. Please, if you'd like to, I said this yesterday to some of our live Zoomers here, we have some volunteer opportunities about helping us with the podcast and being able to kind of create some more content that we can share with everybody. So if you want, please email me at dayal@bhakticenter.org, DAYAL at bhakticenter.org. They're talking about caber tosses here, throwing telephone poles. Yeah, that's what we're gonna that's what we're gonna get into next time. We're shifting from Ram Leela to Lumberjack Olympics. We're gonna get in there. All right, guys, love you. Be well. Take care. We'll see you next time. Be safe. Drive safe. Tell someone that you love them, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.